And good morning, everyone. We are live. Welcome to the Don Lemon Show. Today, I'm joined by a pair of fantastic legal eagles. First up, retired judge of the New York Supreme Court and adjunct professor at New York Law School, Diane Kiesel joins us. Also with me, Paul Callan, the former New York City prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. Thank you both so much for joining me. Boy, oh boy, it is going down in the courtroom today. Both of you know this courtroom very well. Both of you have worked there. You know how all of this works. Paul, I'm going to start with you because I know that you have been paying attention quite closely to the testimony. This is a day everyone has been waiting for. I'm talking about Stormy Daniels has taken the stand in this hush money case against against Donald Trump in New York. As you're following along, what stuck out to you? Was it the pajamas? What's going on?
Well, there are a couple of things. She describes right at the beginning how she met him, and the prosecutor is slowly walking her through her story. But bear in mind that Judge Merchan has issued an order saying there can be reference to a sexual encounter, but he wants no details about it. He wants it to be sort of described in a very general way, not a specific way. And I think the prosecutor's trying to keep her under control as she tells her story. Two things stood out initially to me. One of the things she said was that after she ended up going back to a hotel room with Donald Trump, she met him at some kind of a golf outing. He changed into what were described as white satin pajamas, and that at some point he stood in front of the doorway and was quite intimidating in his appearance. She does say, however, that she wasn't afraid that she couldn't get out of the room, but she just kind of posits that in the record. I hadn't heard that aspect of the story before, and it's got its salacious aspects. So we'll see as it continues for the remainder of the morning and maybe early afternoon.
But she said there was no physical contact.
No.
Did he just stand in front of the door or is something like that?
Yeah, he stood between her and the door, and she just said he's quite tall and his appearance was intimidating. And I think she made a reference to a power differential also in the testimony. Now, the power being, I guess, his money and his political power or his notoriety as a celebrity at that time.
Yeah, Diane, go on. What stood out to you? I would love to hear.
Well, she, despite the fact that the judge has directed the people not to go into extreme detail, we've also learned that he was wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt when she came out of the bathroom. And she described the sex as being in a missionary position. So sounds to me like we're going into a lot more detail than the judge might have wanted. He has already said at least once, and Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, he's already said at least once, people, let's move this along. And as you know, in a New York courtroom, the prosecutor is called the people. And yet the details seem to be coming. That's very frustrating for a judge when you want something to move along and despite your best efforts, things are not going in the direction that you would like them to. So it'll be interesting to see as the testimony goes on, whether the judge will continue to push them to go a little faster and drop a little of the detail.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm going to read some of the detail, and they are going into, it's not explicit. I wouldn't call it explicit by saying missionary position. I don't think that is too explicit, except Daniel says that Trump is not wearing a condom during sex. I think we had heard that before, Paul, or
I'm not sure that.
I remember reporting that she said that. Diane, do you recall that?
I don't recall that.
Yeah. After they had sex, Daniel said that Trump said it was great. That's part of the testimony. The jury has remained expressionless throughout the testimony about the sex. Trump didn't ask Daniels to keep their sex confidential, she said, which is interesting because then he, wanted to have her hush up about it or keep her quiet. She said she felt ashamed of not stopping the sexual encounter. It's interesting because not only, Diane, did the judge object to salacious details, but I want to hone in on an objection that the defense team made right before the proceedings got started this morning. The Trump attorney asked Judge Marchand to bar any, quote, explicit sexual details from Daniel's testimony. The assistant district attorney pushed back on that, saying that Daniel's full testimony narrative is necessary for the prosecution's case. Do you believe that?
Well, it's certain. Remember, Donald Trump initially said he never even met this woman, right? And I think to show that he is not truthful about that encounter, which may lead a jury to infer he's also not truthful about why he may have paid the money to hush it up. It is important to show that the devil's in the details, and if she can describe every little thing that happened in that hotel room, it tends to give it credence. But may I just weigh in on something that you just said, Don, because I think this is important. If Stormy is telling the truth, and he says that he didn't tell her to keep the sex confidential, this is back in 2006, then his argument that he was doing this to protect his family is considerably weaker, isn't it? Because back in 2006, he's newly married, he's got a new baby. He should be telling her, lady, whatever you do, don't tell anybody about this, right? If his prime concern is keeping it away from the family. Paul, what do you think?
Does that, I was wanting to know, do you think that undercuts his, him saying, well, I wanted to keep my family safe, and I didn't want my wife hearing this?
Yeah, I think it does. And it is strange that that wouldn't have come up. But of course, the defense may argue that, well, of course, they're saying he never had sex with her in the first place. So it's not at all odd that it didn't come up because it never happened. I mean, that's the approach the defense is going to take in dealing with Stormy Daniels. And they're going to be trying to discredit her, of course, and rather viciously, I'm sure, on cross-examination.
As I'm reading my Trump notes, that's why I'm looking down here. Stormy Daniels says Trump told her that she reminded him of his daughter. Daniels called a friend while with Trump at his request. And then it says Daniels says that she and Trump talked for 2 hours in his hotel room. Judge Marchand also tells the prosecution that Daniels is giving too much detail. So there have been objections in the courtroom. How do you handle that, Paul, when you're saying you don't want that much detail, but then all these details are coming in where she says she met him, she went into the bathroom and she found Old Spice in his toiletry bag. She describes seeing him in his boxer shorts as a jump scare when she saw him. Well,
I have to say the trial attorney and the judge may have a difference of opinion. And, I've been a former prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, and I've been down this road before. And the judge wants to focus on what he considers to be the important points that are relevant to the elements of the crime. The prosecutor, on the other hand, wants to humanize the witness and wants to establish that the witness is believable. And believability sometimes arises out of the witness's ability to remember details, like the Old Spice or maybe the color of the pajamas or the boxer shorts. And I guess Judge Marchand is fearful that this, maybe he doesn't want to get it to go beyond that and get it into describing anatomical parts of the various participants. So there's maybe there's a limit to how far you can go. And the prosecutor wants to get as much detail in as possible. So I'm not surprised by the prosecution trying to do this.
I'm surprised by some of the details, Diane, because she describes going to a penthouse where she met Trump. She says that he was wearing, as you said, silk satin pajamas when she entered the hotel room. She is actually looking the jury directly into the face. She's speaking directly to them. Trump appears to be listening to Daniel's testimony. She said she sat at a table in the hotel suite and he asked her about adult films. He told her that he and Melania sleep in different rooms. Stormy describes spanking Trump with a magazine. And then the jurors struggle to maintain a poker face when Daniels describes smacking Trump on the butt. Who would want these details, especially a former president, released to the public, Diane? If you would like, upon describing when she had smacked Trump on the butt, some jurors could no longer keep a poker face. One woman was seen rubbing her eyes while trying to hold back laughter without making noise. Daniel said that said that Trump pulled out a magazine, and she said at that point she wanted to eat her dinner and asked him if he was always that rude, saying he didn't know how to have a conversation. I pretty much had enough of his arrogance and cutting me off and still not getting my dinner, Daniel said. Someone should spank you with that, Daniels recalls saying to Trump about the magazine. She said that Trump rolled up the magazine and gave me a look as a kind of dare. So I took it from him and I said, turn around, and I swatted him right on the butt, she testified, and he was more polite.
Well, I'll tell you, the person I feel most sorry for is Judge Merchan. I have been in that situation where I have heard testimony from a witness and I've wanted to burst out laughing. And as a judge, you absolutely cannot. And trying to keep that poker face so that the jury doesn't see it and the public doesn't see it is not easy.
You know, and also just adding to that, of course, Don, as you know, Donald Trump takes himself very, very seriously, and his image is everything. I mean, this is a president who didn't even want to be seen in public with a COVID-19 mask on when he was seriously ill, coming back from the hospital. And now we have a description of him being spanked by a porn star with a magazine in a hotel room. So he must be absolutely dying as he sits there listening to this testimony.
She said that she attended the launch of the Trump vodka. She said she would speak to him on the phone sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. She said that Trump asked to see her again, but then she lied to him. This was in 2007. And she also details a meeting at Trump Tower, which I think is very interesting because he brought her into the place where he lives, not the residence, but to his office to meet with him. And he met with his assistant, Ronna Graff, as well in the lobby area.
I'm speechless, but we have to remember, I guess, that when all of this allegedly went down, he wasn't running for president. Mm-hmm. He was a very rich real estate developer in New York and somewhat of a celebrity because of the Celebrity Apprentice. But he wasn't running for president of the United States. So, I think you have to look at it in this context, if of course we can believe Stormy Daniels, which is what the jury has to decide ultimately.
So you're talking about the judge. You said you'd have Diane, that you'd have trouble keeping a straight face. I'm wondering how this is going to play with the public, though. This is probably the most, obviously I shouldn't say probably, this is the most interesting testimony, the most interesting thing that has happened, except for him falling asleep in the courtroom. I'm just wondering how this plays in the court of public opinion. I don't know if you have, if you care to enlighten us on how you feel about that.
Well, I'm not sure I know. I mean, from what we've seen, from looking at polls and listening to pundits on talk shows, it seems to me that the people who support Donald Trump will support Donald Trump, and no matter what, and the people who are not Trump fans will just love this and eat it up. I mean, I don't know if this, I guess the question you may be asking is, does this change anybody's opinion about what they think of former President Trump? Hard to say.
Yeah. I think the salaciousness goes along with it. Diane, I want to ask you, just a few moments ago, the court took a short break, and while Stormy Daniels was off the stand, this just happened. Judge Merchan told prosecutors, he said, quote, "The degree of detail we're going into here is just unnecessary." He wants them to move more quickly. And I gave you some of the salacious details. What do you think he's specifically talking about? The things that I mentioned?
Oh, sure. I don't think he really thinks it's necessary for the world to know that Mr. Trump got hit on the butt with a magazine. I
want to know
it. I'm sure the public does too, but he doesn't. The interesting thing would be, what are the people going to do with this admonition? Are they going to continue to go down this road and let Stormy say what she wants to say about their encounters? And at what point does the judge adopt a harsher tone and say, counsel, move on? Paul, I know you've heard that in court, as I did when I was a prosecutor. At some point when the judge has had enough, you move on.
Yeah, you
Don't know
do.
how long it will take for the judge to get there.
But Diane, the interesting thing is there's a second part, and that's the cross-examination. And, the defense, in trying to deny that this happened, will be opening the door to redirect by the prosecution to get into even more detail, which would substantiate the testimony. So it's not going to be easy to keep out a lot of this very salacious story that has to be somewhat damaging to the former president.
This is all going on as we speak, so I don't
Exactly.
know. How did you want to say something, Diane, before?
No, just that Paul raises such an excellent point. I don't know how the defense can cross this witness at all without opening some substantially wide doors here. It is a serious problem.
Well, it's
The
already a
minute
Pandora's
they
box. I mean, if
try,
they open it any wider, I mean, who knows what is going to happen. What I wanted to say is that this is all happening as we are speaking now, and you know how Donald Trump usually comes out and he speaks to the cameras. I'm not sure he wants to take questions on this particular witness today, Paul. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I would agree with that. He will. I don't think he will take questions. He might step up to the mics and accuse her of being a liar and someone who's been prepared by the prosecution and helped by Joe Biden and all that other nonsense. But he, I doubt, will want to talk about much detail. If I were his lawyer, I, of course, would say stay away from the microphones and get right in the car today.
Yeah, but if you guys were his lawyers, wouldn't you would have warned him about this? Maybe it wasn't in the cards, but shouldn't he have taken a deal or something so that these salacious details would not have to come out? Just say, I don't want to have to go through all of this. I just want to run for president, and they're gonna, they're railroading me anyway, so I may as well just make this deal and move on. No?
What?
as a possible president, as the presumptive presidential nominee from the Republican Party, well, how can he take a deal? I mean, I would think that the prosecution would want him to plead to a felony, right? I don't know that he could do that if he thinks he still has a political career.
I agree, Diane.
I would take the felony over someone smacking me on the butt with a magazine, but
over
go
the
on.
smack with the magazine,
and then fight it later to get it overturned. But go on.
But to take the deal, you'd be very limited in terms of your appellate prospects later on. Number one, but there's something called an elocution that goes on in court when you plead guilty. Now, the prosecutors might say, all right, we'll only make him plead to one of the 34 felony counts, but the judge has to walk him through it, that he knew what he was doing, that he caused, false entries to be made in the business records, and that he did it to unlawfully affect the presidential election. All of those are the elements of the crime, and he would have to admit that in the what they call the elocution of the plea, which would be extraordinarily damning to his reputation. And you couldn't say that elocution was something made up by the unfair prosecutors and everybody else in the world. He'd be saying it in his own words. So
yeah, you could say. I mean, he would say it. Come on, he would still say, "I did it for you."
The court wouldn't accept the plea.
Yeah, I did it. Afterwards, he would say, "I did it for you. I did it because I didn't want to put you through it. I did it because I'm trying to save you from the whole thing." And I think that's what he would say. But I'm just wondering, how damaging do you think Stormy did? I know it's salacious and people are going to be interested in it and people are going to write about it and they're going to make fun of it or what have you. But how damaging, Diane, do you think that this testimony is? Because she goes into so many details, and what of her credibility?
Well, look, it depends on damaging in what context, right? I mean, we all know the history of the blue dress, right, with President Bill Clinton, and yet he survived that quite well. And so the question becomes, in the immediate context, this testimony, I do think, is just like another nail in the coffin, if you will, if you believe that she is credible, because once again, it shows that that Mr. Trump, while he was running for president, needed to cover this up so that he could become president. And in the years since, he's been lying about it. And now he's facing criminal criminal charges because of it. Okay. So in that context, I think her testimony, the detail of it, is very important. But in terms of what it means in his obituary or, years from now, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Paul, let's talk about, I want to talk about some of the other witnesses that prosecutors called this morning. The senior vice president at Penguin Random House, Sally Franklin. Prosecutors asked Franklin to read a short excerpt from 2 of Trump's books, including one in which Trump says that smart business people should know all the parts of their business, even down to the paper clips. I'm going to ask you what you make of this testimony, but I would think it's because he would say, I didn't have knowledge of this. Someone did it on their own. And if you wrote this in a book, then you certainly should have had knowledge of these transactions. Am I correct in that?
Yes, yeah, you are. I mean, obviously, the biggest weakness in the prosecutor's case so far is not that he actually had sex with Stormy Daniels, but what entry was made in the business records that were false. And from what we've heard so far, Trump himself didn't make any business entries in the ledger. Now, he did sign a check, and I think prosecutors will later argue that signature on the check is a business record, and it probably is. But in terms of the false aspect of it, those entries were made by somebody else, and it hasn't really been strongly linked to Trump at this point in time. I think the prosecutor will try to put it all together through other witnesses, but that's what you got to prove this case. He has to have ordered the false entry or made it himself, and with the intent to commit another crime or cover up another crime, and that being election interference. So those are the elements that they're trying to prove.
But it's interesting that what looks like a testimony that is kind of dull and not that important, actually, I think is very important. That book editor, through her, they got all of these excerpts in that showed that this man was really a hands-on guy at that company. And I think that's very important for the people in this case. Wouldn't you agree, Paul?
Yeah, I would. And the way prosecutors will use this later on is they're going to say, Trump is very detail oriented. And here he is writing out a check for which would include a payoff of $130,000 to Stormy Daniels. And he certainly would have been very aware of what that payment was for. He has a reputation for being kind of a cheapskate, actually, and being very careful with his money. So the book entry just is corroboration of that he completely believes in checking on the number of paper clips to effectively run a business. So he's certainly going to know about $130,000 being paid to Stormy Daniels, or huge amounts of money being paid to a lawyer, Michael Cohen, without even a retainer specifying what his hourly rate is or what his annual salary should be.
And speaking of that, let me read something. This is something else from the testimony today, okay? And it involves the $130,000 payment, or at least the company that was involved in that, which was AMI and David Pecker. He was a witness earlier this week and last week. So here's what Daniels testified, that in 2011, she was contacted by someone with In Touch magazine who said they were going to publish a story about her affair with Trump and offered her $15,000 to participate in the interview. I freaked out, she said. I don't know who leaked it, she said. I said no at first, but they said they're going to run it anyway. She said she decided to do the interview so I could control the narrative. The magazine was then owned by American Media, AMI, as I said, American Media Inc., the same parent company as the National Enquirer, which was run by David Pecker, who testified earlier in the trial about burying and suppressing unflattering stories in order to protect Trump. Where does this testimony fit in? Diane?
Well, go ahead, Diane.
Well, you need to think of testimony at trial as basically building blocks for your summation, right? Every single thing you hear in court is so that in summation, a lawyer can argue his or her position about the case. So this is sort of one more piece of the puzzle, or building block, if you will, that will get, if believed, will get the prosecutor where the prosecutor needs to go, which is to convince 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump was well aware of these payments being made and they were being made so that he could become president of the United States.
Listen, the judge yesterday gave Trump a stern warning saying, listen, if you continue to do this, I'll have no alternative but to put you in jail. I don't want to do it because you're a former president. You could be the next president of the United States, but I have to do my job. You can't continue to defy the gag orders, right? And he's going to face criminal contempt again if he does it. At 7:30 this morning, Paul, Trump posted on Truth Social that he had just learned who the upcoming witnesses were and that his team had no time to prepare. Within 30 minutes, he took that post down. Do you think that's because he's actually afraid of being sent to jail?
You know, that may be that he didn't want to blow up on that particular issue today, but it sounds to me like he's almost provoking the judge. I mean, I saw him yesterday making a statement, and I'm sure you saw it too, Don and Diane, that talking about the First Amendment, saying my First Amendment rights have been violated, and it will be worth the price for me to make improper statements, was the implication, and to continue making improper statements. So I think right now he feels that Mershon is in a corner. Mershon can only fine him $1,000 because that's the maximum for criminal contempt under the statute that's involved here. And as Mershon explained yesterday, this is unprecedented. A former president of the United States who might be a future president. Mershon is thinking, how will this affect the presidential election? Now, he's not supposed to be considering that, but he certainly has to. If I put him in jail, will he go up in the polls because he's more popular with his followers, or will it cause the collapse of his candidacy? It's going to have implications for the entire United States and actually in some respects the world because of the leadership role the president of the United States takes. So Mershon is in a very, very tough spot, Diane. I think for a judge in Manhattan, who you get a lot of big cases and interesting cases in Manhattan, but boy, this one seems to top the list.
This one has to be up there, Diane. I have to ask you, if you were overseeing the bench, right? If you were on the bench overseeing this case, I should say, like this one with the president routinely flouting gag orders, would you put him in jail, even if you thought it might help him politically?
I think a judge not only can, but must protect the integrity of the court process. And despite what it might do in the polls, if he continues to keep it up, I really don't see how Judge Mershon has any choice. It's the last thing he wants to do. He's probably, if he's a religious man, he's saying a novena every night so he doesn't have to. But if it comes down to that, I think he could and should and probably would do it.
Don, I just wanted to add something to that, because my feeling on it is that he should, in an interim way, put him into jail for a brief period of time. I would, some of my unfortunate clients have been in those cells behind the courthouse getting served that bologna sandwich lunch. If I were the judge, I'd be looking to have Trump dine on one of those bologna sandwiches in a cell behind the courtroom for a couple of hours, maybe even just overnight, to get a taste of what incarceration is like. And I will tell you, I'm stopped constantly by people who say to me, is he being treated the same way a normal defendant would be treated in court? And I have to say, no. 10 times he's been held in criminal contempt, and he's had his wrist slapped each time, and he's trying to provoke the judge. So at the very least, put him in jail for an afternoon or a few hours in any event. And then the next step might be a longer sentence if he continues to violate the order.
Part of the testimony she's talking about, this encounter she had in a Las Vegas parking lot after the In Touch magazine. I think this was where she and her daughter were heading to a Mommy and Me workout class when she was approached by a man in the parking lot. She said that it was my husband or something. I thought he was the husband of one of the other women in the class. She said he threatened me not to continue to tell my story. I'd heard that earlier, Paul. That had happened earlier as we were reporting this when.
That's an old story.
Yeah,
that's been out for a long time, and Trump denied that previously. That he sent anybody to threaten her. I mean, that's a threat by somebody presumably hired to put fear in her if she told the story.
When asked about the infamous Access Hollywood tape, the release of that, she said many people were interested in her, I'm paraphrasing here, in getting her story out. And did you have any intention of approaching either Mr. Trump or Michael Cohen? One attorney asked her to have them pay for your story. This was the prosecutor, Susan Hoffinger, asked. And Daniel said, no, her motivation was not money. She just wanted to get her story out publicly. But here's the interesting part to me, and it's kind of what we talked about, and I think we'll end on this. The public, there are members of the public who are in the courtroom, and the reporters are gauging the interest of the folks in the courtroom. They're looking around, and I'm sure the jury is as well. And as I said, people are interested in the salacious part of this, the details about the pajamas and on and on and on. But when Stormy Daniels started to talk about the actual details of the hush money terms, it said the interest seems to have waned over the last 30 minutes or so. At least 2 people appear to be falling asleep. That tells you everything, doesn't it, Diane?
That's, yeah, it does. What people don't realize about a trial, because they watch it in movies or excerpts, there are many parts of a trial that are boring.
Yeah.
That are simply things that have to get put before the jury, and they are not salacious. They're not titillating. And one thing that people who are watching a trial like this come to realize is that it's very different than it is on
Law and Order
television or in the movies.
Yeah, when you see Law and Order,
Order,
when the crime happens and then everything gets solved and the person goes to court within an hour, that doesn't happen. How long have we been talking about this case? We've been talking about it for almost 10 years now. Paul, I have to ask you, the reason I ask is because members of the jury are made up of the general public. And if the general public, the jury, right, they're tasked to follow the details, but they may get bogged down in the details and say, you know what I'm saying?
I know, but I have to say, this is a white collar case involving records, and they're always boring cases. But most defendants get convicted in these cases. In federal court, it's up around 97 or 98% in some of these white collar business records cases. And I'm sure the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has a similar conviction rate in these cases. So despite the boredom aspect, once everything is put into evidence and they go back to deliberate, juries frequently convict in these white-collar business record crimes.
And so
but this is a different animal, Don. So Stormy Daniels probably is going to be the most interesting thing that the jury sees as the case continues. And because I don't think Trump's going to take the stand. That would be the only thing that would be as interesting.
You never know with him. So just quickly, I know you're not in the prediction business. You don't like to. Paul, what do you think? Will he be convicted?
My feeling right now is I'd be in the 60 or 70% conviction range with maybe a 30% chance of a hung jury, 20% chance of a hung jury. And I say that because, and I still don't know why the prosecutors left 2 lawyers on the jury. If they hyper-analyze the case, the big problem with the case is not the forging of or the falsifying of the business records. It's linking it specifically to another crime. I'm not sure that an appellate court will uphold that theory on appeal. So I think there's trouble ahead for the case, even if they get a conviction. But I think there's a good chance they will get a conviction on this fact pattern.
Diane, Stormy with a chance of conviction?
Oh.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said Stormy with a chance of conviction.
Very good. Yes, that's a good weather prediction. I like it. Look, I was never great at predicting what juries might do, but I must say that over the years, I have talked to some members of the jury after their verdict, of course, and what always warmed my heart, and as corny as this sounds, they take their role very, very seriously, and they listen and they watch, and whatever they do, they will not reach their decision lightly.
All right. Diane Kiesel, excuse me, Diane Kiesel and Paul Callan, I appreciate both of you joining. We'll see you back here again. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.